Good afternoon. President Ouattara, it is a pleasure to welcome you at Columbia, and I would like to thank you for our community for accepting to come and have a conversation with us this afternoon. It's also a pleasure to welcome you all to this Columbia World Leaders Forum event. As I already mentioned, we are joined today by His Excellency, Dr. Alassane Ouattara, President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, Madame Dominique Claudine Ouattara, First Lady of Côte d'Ivoire, and the members of the Ivorian delegation. I would like to acknowledge the co-sponsor of this event along the World Leaders Forum, the Columbia University Institute of African Studies. Please, before introducing His Excellency President Ouattara, I would like to introduce briefly the World Leaders Forum and its purpose. The World Leaders Forum was founded in 2003 by our President Lee Bollinger to support robust dialogue on the most pressing issues facing our global society. For 10 years, it has allowed our students, faculty, and staff to engage directly with the men and the women involved in addressing the major challenges of the 21st century. By allowing the university community to enter into a conversation with leaders who are grappling with major challenges on the international stage, the World Leaders Forum allows Columbia to fulfill one of its most important duties as a global center of learning. We take as an article of faith that only through a free exchange of ideas will solution be found to the biggest problem facing society. It is an opportunity that will be difficult, if not impossible, to duplicate in any other city or any other university. Columbia has always been among the most international institutions in the most global of American cities, with a large and growing percentage of faculty, graduate, and undergraduate drawn from foreign nations. We have spent the last 4 years creating a network of global centers in 8 cities: Paris, Istanbul, Amman, Nairobi, Mumbai, Beijing, Santiago, and Rio de Janeiro. Our mission demands a global perspective, and discussion like the one we are about to have today are a cornerstone of this pursuit. So please join me to welcome again President Ouattara before I introduce him. Dr. Alassane Ouattara is the 5th President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire. He was elected for the first time in 2010. An economist by training, he holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Drexel Institute of Technology in Philadelphia, a master's degree and a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia also. In 1968, he joined the International Monetary Fund, where he held a position of increasing responsibility, and later joined the Central Bank of West African State, where at age 40, he became the deputy governor and later the governor of the bank. In April 1990, while Côte d'Ivoire was hit by an unprecedented crisis, Dr. Alassane Ouattara was appointed by late President Félix Houphouët-Boigny, chairman of the Interministerial Committee for Coordination of the Stabilization Program and Economic Recovery. A few months later, he was appointed as Côte d'Ivoire's first Prime Minister and head of government until December 1993. He then returned to the IMF, where he served as Deputy Managing Director, the highest position held by an African in this institution to date. Following an extremely successful international career, Dr. Ouattara returned home in 1990 to take over the presidency of one of Côte d'Ivoire's major political parties, the Rassemblement des Républiques, RDR, in 2010. Dr. Ouattara won the election with 54.10% of the vote. President Ouattara is considered as the father of the new emerging Côte d'Ivoire. He introduced many economic reforms that transformed Côte d'Ivoire and improved the livelihood of millions of Ivorians. Under President Ouattara's leadership, Côte d'Ivoire became the third fastest growing economy in Africa. Based on such an economic growth and social progress was experienced during his first presidential term. President Ouattara was re-elected for a second term in October 2015 on the first round of the election with 83.66% of the vote. To this official biography I have just read, I would like to add two important elements to highlight from a historical perspective. I am a historian. The contribution of President Ouattara to the recent political and economic history of Africa. First, his persistence in remaining in the public sphere, which has been criticized, has proven that Africans are not always caught in the traps of political tribalism. Despite the legal maneuvers and the violence aimed at excluding him under the accusation he was not an Ivorian, he won the presidential election. 10 years of propaganda against Côte, the stranger was decisively denied at the polls. Second, the success story of the Côte d'Ivoire economy has been attributed to his policies and reform. Though we are not necessarily obligated to share his liberal and globalizing conception of the governance of economy, we must recognize that he has succeeded in restoring the economy of Côte d'Ivoire successively as the chairman of the Committee for Coordination of the Stabilization Program, as a prime minister and head of the government in the early 90s, and also as a president of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire since 2010. What I would like to ask the president is, could he assure us that it is possible to reenact the miracle Ivoirien in a global context when the discussion about the future of the CFA zone is raging, but also to reconcile Ivorian after the Ivoirity crisis. His Excellency, I would like again to thank you for accepting our invitation to discuss with us your expertise and experience in the international stage and grasp of the constraint of opportunity of the African continent position you as one of the best interlocutor in a conversation on global African and Ivorian issue. I am sure that you will lend yourself with good grace to sometimes harsh questions of our community. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Diouf, members of the faculty, honorable guests, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. My delegation, I think, has come from the 72nd meeting of the General Assembly, so there are many of them here. I can't introduce all of them. It will take a good half an hour. But we have the First Lady, Dominique, the Secretary General of the Presidency, Minister of Integration, Minister of Health, Minister of Petroleum, Minister of Planning, Minister of Solidarity, the Ambassador, Chief of Staff of the Presidency, Special Advisor, Director of Communication. Shall I continue? No, I should not. But it's a great honor and a real pleasure to be back at the university environment. As Professor Diouf said, I myself studied in the States a few decades ago, and at the University of Pennsylvania. And I was telling Professor Diouf how much I enjoy being in this particular environment. And I'd like to thank the students for being here. And I understand we have 3 Ivorians. Maybe they're not all here, but I'd like to acknowledge them. Alassane Ouattara was Bachelor of Arts in Financial Economics. I don't know if he's here. He's here. Well, nice to see you. And we have Fofana Idris, who is a PhD in global history. I don't think he's here. Apparently, he's traveling between Columbia, Yale, Harvard. Shows how Ivorians are brilliant, Professor. So I'm very happy to acknowledge him. And Nina Keita, who is an MBA in Africa, 2017. So I was told that I could give you a brief presentation on the challenges for successful demographic transition, enriching Africa's potential, and to give you the case of Côte d'Ivoire. And obviously, I could take a good half an hour speaking about this, but I'd like to be brief and to tell you that this is quite a challenge for Africans and Africa, because our population today is 1.2 billion. It's growing very fast, and in about 33 years, by 2050, Africa will account for 1/4 of the world population. And it will have the youngest population in the continent, in the world. So this is clearly a major challenge for governments, but for the people of Africa and for the world, I would say. And also it's a good opportunity because obviously with a young population, it means having a strong manpower and also chances of accelerating technology and innovation. And Africa, of course, 20 years ago was seen as the hopeless continent by the economists. Today, obviously, this has changed. It was about 10 years ago, Africa's rising and now aspiring Africa, because the progress has been quite impressive. And obviously, this is due to a lot of things that you know. I will not insist on them, because of the abundant natural resources of the continent. And we have achieved also the strongest growth rate in the world over the past 10 years or so. The past 3 years have been very difficult, but clearly we've been much above the growth rates of the OECD countries. And this is a challenge, I was saying, because at this pace, in terms of population growth, by 2050, Nigeria will be the third most populated country, ahead of, after China and India, and ahead of the United States in terms of population. And I think, if my recollection is right, Ethiopia and Congo-Kinshasa will be among the 10 most populated countries in the world. So this shows how much potential there is in terms of demography. And obviously, this will require that the governments work harder, develop policies which can create jobs and also absorb the young population, and to avoid some of the problems that we've been talking about today, actually at the UN, a question about migration of the young through the Sahara, dying in the Mediterranean because they're not allowed to reach Europe. And obviously, this challenge, we can try to hasten it. It's not easy, but I think it's our responsibility. And if we don't have the right policies, I think clearly it will be a problem not only for Africa, but for the world at large, as I said, giving the question of migration as an example. And today we had a lunch with President Trump. We were not many, just 9 heads of states. And these are some of the issues we discussed with him to get a bit more precision on his vision for Africa and the policies of the United States in the years to come. Now, I think to make sure that we continue to make progress, we need to ensure political stability, peace, and security. And Côte d'Ivoire is a clear example of this. We had nearly 4 decades of peace and tranquility from independence in 1960 to nearly 2000, although a few years before that we had some problems. But the worst years were between 2000 and 2010, when the country really went through madness, I would say. But clearly, we need to strengthen the democratic institutions, and this is being done not only in Côte d'Ivoire, but Ghana is a clear example, Senegal, and also Nigeria. And we need to also make sure that we, the leaders, we make enough investment in the major sectors, social sectors, health and good education, especially education of girls. And we need to develop and implement well-designed national policies, which we're doing in Côte d'Ivoire. And later on, I'll give you a few examples as to our performance on the economic and social field. And many of the African countries are among the best performers in the World Bank doing business report, and I think this is quite a welcome development for our continent. One thing we all agree today, and with the head of states with whom we met, is that we need to accelerate the investment in infrastructure and also on domestic mobilization of resources, domestic resources, because we need to finance large-scale regional projects in not only transport roads, but in power, in energy, and this is something which is a challenge for many African countries. And basically, one thing which is not working very well in the continent is economic integration. And we need to deepen the regional integration. And I'm very proud to say that this is a reality in West Africa with ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, with the 15 countries accounting for more than 300 million people, and also the Regional Monetary and Economic Union of West Africa of 100 million people, where clearly there is good coordination of economic policies and free movements of goods and people among the countries. And clearly, Côte d'Ivoire is a champion of this because intra-African trade, the trade we have with the other African countries, accounts for 1/3 of our total trade, while for Africa the average is between 10 and 12%. So accelerating integration is something which is essential if we want to make more progress to absorb this large demographic growth. Now, let me say a few words about Côte d'Ivoire. I think this, as I noted, the President Professor Diouf said this is a conversation, so I don't want to read you a speech, but I'd like to give you say a few words about Côte d'Ivoire, and then receive your question. Côte d'Ivoire has a central place in West Africa. We have the largest country is Nigeria with 175 million people out of 300 million or more, 320 million. Then you have the other block of countries, essentially the former French-speaking countries which use the CFA franc you mentioned, accounting for about 100 million. And of that group, Côte d'Ivoire clearly is an important partner because it accounts for more than 35% of GDP, more than 40% of exports and so forth. And the fact that during the 10 years of crisis, there was no investment. In fact, the ratio of investment to GDP had dropped to 10%, 9%, and growth was close to zero, while the population growth had been more than 2% per year. So that means during those 10 years, the rate of poverty increased substantially from what it was during the period 90 to 93 when I was Prime Minister. And when we were elected after 4.5 months in the Gulf Hotel, surrounded by the troops of the previous president, we developed a team, most of them are here actually, people developed a policy. In fact, we developed what we call a presidential program of urgency, Programme présidentiel d'urgence. So when we got out of the Gulf Hotel, we were able to start the implementation of this program. So actually being held hostages for 4.5 months, it was not pleasant, but it was useful for the country, since we used to work together with my team at any time. Sometime I would call them at midnight, I tell them, well, I have an idea, let's come and work on it. So it reminded me as if I had been back at the University of Pennsylvania. So I enjoyed very much this period, despite the stress we went through. And our priorities were clear, and I think the achievements also. You mentioned, Professor, that we have held democratic elections, and we have set up also, through a referendum, a new constitution last year, which now provides, like the United States, tickets, president and vice president. This is the idea of strengthening the regions of the country, because clearly the will of getting or keeping power is so strong in Africa. I think it's always good to have some power sharing so that it will not destabilize the country. So this is something which I personally felt was important for my country. And this is what is in place in Ghana, in South Africa, in Nigeria. It's not something usual in the Francophone countries. So I must say we got a lot of criticism, but I'm sure with time people will see that this is a major contribution to the future stability of my country. In terms of achievements in the economic policies, we have over the 5 years, 2012 to 2016, an average annual growth rate of 9%, which has been sometimes 10%, sometimes 8%, but on the average 9%, which is among the 10 highest growing countries in the world. And this allowed us in the 5-year period to increase our GDP by 50% and then reduce the level of poverty, although not sufficiently. And we were able to do this through, of course, good macroeconomic policies in terms of keeping the deficit low, keeping the debt at a reasonable level, and also making sure that we make the structural reforms necessary for the country. And in fact, the World Bank considered that we were among, for 2 consecutive years, we were among the world best countries, most reforming countries in the world, according to the World Bank doing business reports. And this good performance was also due to various investment codes, which we improved, the mining code, the petroleum code, the general investment code, and so forth. And as a result, the ratio of investment to GDP, which was about 9% in 2011, was 20% in 2016, so it more than doubled. This, of course, explains why the growth rate had been so high. And at the same time, we put a lot of emphasis on social expenditure, health and education, which allowed the rate of poverty, the degree of poverty, to drop substantially during this period. And of course, we made good progress on employment, especially youth employment, and we're very proud of that. And in terms of social expenditure, we now make sure that 1/3 of the budget is devoted to social expenditures in health and education, because obviously we give so much emphasis to private investment, that the private sector is really the main engine of growth. So the public sector, the government can emphasize and concentrate on financing social expenditure. So these are some of the elements I wanted to share with you, and to say also that improving health and education, that's not enough. We try to improve access to electricity We, for example, we were able to raise the electricity energy production by about 40% by 2016, so to 2,000 megawatt. And my objective is for us to be able to raise this to 4,000 megawatts by 2020. And Côte d'Ivoire is a country where the rate of electricity being cut per year is the lowest in Africa. About 4 years ago, South Africa and Cape Verde were ahead of us. I think it's now about, 16 hours per year, Adama? 16 hours per year of lack of electricity, which means about 1 hour per month for the whole country where you have electricity. If you go to some countries I will not name, you'll see that the lack of electricity is about 20 hours per day. So this is clearly a major development. And so in terms of water production, we were able, in 5 years, thanks to Patrick Ashi, who was Minister of Infrastructure, sitting next to the First Lady, in 5 years, we doubled the production of water, potable water, compared to the 50 years prior to our arrival. This shows how much progress was made. So in many areas where you did not have any water for the population, so we were able to improve this, and we built a lot of classrooms, of health centers, and so forth and so on. So I don't want to stay longer on this performance. So just to say that basically, as of today, the economy is in very, very good shape, despite the drop in the world price of cocoa. Probably you know that Côte d'Ivoire accounts for 40% of world cocoa, and so anytime you eat a piece of chocolate, there is a good chance that 40% of it comes from Côte d'Ivoire. So we're the first world producer of cocoa, and the price of cocoa dropped by 35 to 40% earlier this year, and this obviously needed some adjustment. And also we had strikes, we had problems with the security forces, which needed more expenditure. But I told people this is the result of really growth and more wealth, because everyone wants to get his share, and as a result, you have to get into dialogue to accommodate these situations. And as of today, the situation is quite good. The prospects are good. And we think that our growth rate should continue to be very high, 7 to 8% over the next few years until 2020. So this is, Professor, members of faculty, some of the highlights of my presentation I wanted to give you. And I say that it's a conversation. I wanted to tell you how much the demographic growth is high in Africa. It's a good thing. It's a challenge. But Côte d'Ivoire today has 24 million. By 2050, we'll have more than 50 million. By 2100, we'll have more than 100 million, a larger population than that of France. And as I said clearly, Nigeria by 2050 will be the third largest populated country in the world, and with Ethiopia and Congo-Kinshasa, which have today 100 million each, will have 250, 400, 300 million people. This means that we, the officials, have to do our best to have good policies, to be open to trade, to world trade, to make sure that we implement the right policies so that job creation is a reality, especially for the young people. So, Professor, thank you very much. These are some of the elements I wanted to give.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, for a clear, very detailed presentation which highlighted issues which are both global, as I was saying, African and Ivorian. For the Q&A, I would like to set the rules to make sure that everybody who wants to ask a question will have a chance to ask it, and will give His Excellency the time to answer your question. So you have, I think, 2 mics, in the aisles. The idea is, if you want to ask a question, you can line up behind one of the mics, and I will call on you, and you will be able to ask your question. So the 2 mics are there, so the floor is open. But the only thing I would like to ask you to do when you come to ask a question is to state your name and what school you are studying or affiliated from. Go ahead.
Hello, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for sharing your remarks with us and for taking the time to be with us this evening. My name is Rachel McCauley. I am an alumna of Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, studied economic and political development, now working for an African agribusiness company based here in New York. You touched a little bit about Côte d'Ivoire's cocoa production, and I'd like to hear a little more about agriculture and some of the things that African countries can do to make themselves a global player in production. We know that Africa is home to a lot of the world's arable land, but produces only a small fraction in terms of global food. So what are the things that you think need to be put in place in order for African countries to be global producers? Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall we take
We can
question
take
by question
2
or,
questions.
2 questions and then, okay.
Hi, thank you very much for having me too. This is Fumiko Sasaki, and I'm a faculty member here in Colombia at STRIPA. I teach East Asian security, but also I'm a director of NGO called Distance Education for Africa, and I'm talking to the African people every week. So I have 2 questions. One is about corruption, and one is about the tribal divide. And sounds like that the Côte d'Ivoire is overcoming very well, which is reflected in your economic growth. So I wonder how you cope with 2 very critical issues in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think for the first question on concerning cocoa, yes, we are the first world producer of cocoa, but I should also mention that we're the first world producer of cashew nuts over the past 2 years, before India, which was the first world producer. We're the first African producer of banana, first African producer of pineapple, and so forth and so on. So this shows that Côte d'Ivoire has a very, very comprehensive agricultural policy. This was really implemented by our first president, and we need to be thankful to him, because when you see today, for the past 3 years, the problems that the oil-producing countries are having put emphasis on agriculture, and the diversification of agriculture is a blessing. Thanks to that, despite the drop in the price of cocoa, we're going to have a growth rate of 7% this year, which is clearly something outstanding. And we believe that for all these products, we have a comprehensive plan which has as a counterpart the development of consumer products like rice. For example, we have a self-sufficiency rice production program, which by next year or the year after we should be able to produce enough rice for our domestic consumption and even be able to export it to some of the neighboring countries. While 3-4 years ago, we used to import about 1/3 of the rice consumption. And we also are doing a lot to improve the production of vegetables and tomatoes and so forth and so on. So we think clearly this is going to be a focus of our policy to develop agriculture, not only for export, but for our domestic consumption. Côte d'Ivoire intends to remain a major agricultural economy. At the same time, with the new mining code, the petroleum code, we're increasing very sharply the production of gold, for example. We're now at 30 tons, 30 tons of gold production. We were at less than 10 5 years ago. And petroleum production is also rising. And we have other minerals which are being exploited. But we believe it's important to make sure that agriculture continues to be the mainstream of our policy. Now, on the question of the corruption and tribal divide, this is a problem for Africa. I agree. Corruption for all countries, because as people say, to have corruption, you have to have some people who also encourage corruption. And we have been very, very tough on this issue of corruption. I agree that because of the 10 years of bad governance in my country, from 2000 to 2010, it was very difficult initially in the administration, but we took a lot of measures, including the declaration of wealth. We set up a high authority for good governance and so forth, but the implementation of this takes time. But we do hope that the private sector now acknowledges that the problem of corruption is less today than it was a few years back. But of course, it's not wiped out the way I would like personally. But we will continue on this. On the question of tribal divide, you are right. This has been the major problem of Côte d'Ivoire. You see, the country has had liberal policies in the economic field, but openness also in terms of the population intake. And as a result, as of today, Côte d'Ivoire has 24 million people, but out of the 6 million are from the neighboring countries. That means it's 25% of the population is from are not Ivory Coast nationals. And obviously, at some stage, if this is exploited politically, this creates a problem. And Professor Diouf mentioned what we went through during that period when people tried to use this politically. But now the nationality code has been improved to make sure that all those who were born in Côte d'Ivoire before independence are considered Ivorian, or if their parents were born in Côte d'Ivoire before independence, and so forth. And also, we try to improve the naturalization process to make sure that we get people who can make a good contribution to the economy and the country to have Ivory Coast nationality without much problem. So, see, this is, and also the new constitution, for example, indicates that to be a presidential candidate, you have, of course, to be of Ivorian descent by one of your parents, while the previous constitution used to say that you had to prove that your father, your grandfather, all the great-great-great-great-great-fathers are from Côte d'Ivoire, while Côte d'Ivoire existed only since 1960, so it was completely ridiculous. But everyone understood it was used to make sure that competitors would not be able to get into a race. While democracy is to let everyone become a candidate so that the people decide, and not a group of people sit in a room and decide who should be able to contest. So the new constitution gives full openness to candidacy when people want to run for office. So these are some of the elements I wanted to give on these two questions.
Thank you.
His Excellency, I thank you for a very good presentation. My name is Trevor Rugwawa. I'm a Zimbabwean who was born and raised in Botswana. I'm a sophomore at Columbia College. So I actually have two questions. Firstly, you talked about how there are problems in African countries in terms of economic integration, and I was wondering if you could elaborate more about some of the problems which African countries face. You don't have to really go into detail about the names of countries. And also, I wanted to know if, maybe one of the best things which you can say which people should know about Côte d'Ivoire, the best, yeah. So yeah, thank you.
What's the second part? I didn't get.
The best thing about Côte d'Ivoire, yes.
Thank you.
Idris.
Bonsoir, Monsieur le Président. My name is Idris Fofana, and I'm a PhD student in the Department of History with my friend Arsène in the back. We're one of the Ivorian students here at Columbia. And I apologize, I just found out that this was happening seeing the delegation's vehicles outside, so not very well prepared. But my question, you mentioned that a lot of the bases for Ivory Coast's current success economically were founded under the first president and during that history, but one must also recognize that a lot of the problems that the country underwent between 2000 and 2010 also have roots in its deeper history. So my question is, what lessons do you think we must draw from experience for its 40, 50 years of independence, and what have you done to make sure that those mistakes aren't repeated in the future? Thank you.
Okay. Arsène wants to, you have a question also?
Arsène, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Professor Diouf. He's actually my professor this semester. I'm taking his class of Africa before colonialism. My name is Alassane Ouattara, and I'm a former professional soccer player. I represented the country of Ivory Coast many times. And Columbia gave me a second chance to go back to school, so I am a senior at the School of General Studies. I'm studying financial economics. I have two questions, Mr. President. The first one is about economics. It is not a secret that the Chinese economy is moving from the manufacturing stage to the service stage. This means there is an opportunity for African countries to attract all these investments and create jobs. For example, Ethiopia is already benefiting from these opportunities. What are your plans, or what are you planning to do for Ivory Coast in order to attract these investment and create jobs? The second question is not really a question. As you can see, we are many Ivorians going to school in the United States. It's a great country where we are learning a lot of skills. Through Columbia University, I gained some experience in investment banking. I also gained some experience in corporate finance, working for different great corporations. We love our country and we want to help develop the country. What are you planning to help us go back and help the country? Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Professor Diouf.
Well,
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question concerning economic integration. Well, obviously one can spend a lot of time about developing this, but what is important to know is to create the conditions. I think there are two areas where it works quite well. One is ECOWAS and the other is SADC, because clearly there is political will, and also the countries have goods to trade with each other. And I think there is also a good environment where you're from Zimbabwe, but globally a good democratic environment in most of the countries. And I think all this helps in terms of setting rules, abiding by them, and so forth. So it's not easy, I would say, because sometimes when people see that one of the countries, Côte d'Ivoire, for example, has been making a lot of progress and want to export goods to some other countries, it requires that we send our ministers to convince our partners that this is in accordance with our community rules. And nationals from other countries can come and work easily in Côte d'Ivoire, but I've lived myself in other countries in West Africa. It's very difficult for Ivorians to work in the other countries. So you have to have a will to get the environment, both in terms of rules, the regulations, I think coordinated, and to make them fair in terms of access to everyone. So, but it's not an easy thing to do. In West Africa, one of the advantages we have is that among the 15 countries, of the 15 countries, 8 already are in an economic and monetary union. So they have the same money, they have the same legal framework and so forth, so same language, and so this has facilitated things. And then you have Nigeria, which is a country by itself, a continent, I would say, by itself, and so forth. So this is, and you have the same thing in the SADC group with South Africa being an engine. So if you have engines of really integration, it can work. And Côte d'Ivoire has been an engine for integration by absorbing the population of other countries. Now, you said, what's the best thing about Côte d'Ivoire? I would say it's hospitality, really. Ivorians are known to be hospitable people. So this is, you come to Côte d'Ivoire and spend a few days and you'll see that Ivorian people are nice and good people. Thank you. And now Idris said that I talked about what our first president did for us in the economic field, and but he's clearly saying that some of the political problems that we inherited was of his doing, and I agree fully, because we, for 4 decades, we had a one-party system and so forth. And I think the lesson I would draw from that is that it's important to have democracy and fair elections and make sure that people have an equal access to the wealth of the country, to the problems of the country, make the equal access to making the contribution to the country. So clearly, and I think this is the idea of the new constitution that we have set up to make sure that it forces, in a way, political integration, and at the same time, it gives an opportunity for everyone to compete. And if a competition is fair, the people will decide. And I think it's important that someone does not pick one person as a ruler of the country. And Alassane Ouattara mentioned, that the Chinese economy and the performance of the Chinese investments in Africa, this is something we we recognize and we're working very well with the Chinese in terms of coming and setting up manufacturing industries in Côte d'Ivoire. It's important. For example, we produce cocoa, but we process only 1/3 of our cocoa production. 2/3 are sent outside without any processing. So I've talked to the Chinese and I said, well, why don't you come and set manufacturing industries to transform the cocoa into cocoa butter and cocoa paste so that, and then send them to China if you want to produce chocolate for the Chinese and so forth and so on. And we have proposed that they do this and working with the Vietnamese, for example, to do this in the area of cashew nuts, because we produce more than 700,000 tons of cashew nuts, more than India. We're the first producer, but we process only 8% of the cashew nuts. So we're encouraging them to set industries in Côte d'Ivoire to process the cashew nuts and so forth. So I think clearly there is a good possibility for having the Chinese set up industries in our countries. Now, you Ivorian in the US, you know, every time I travel to a country, I have a Minister of Integration with me. I don't know where Ali is here. I used to meet with the Ivorians in the official visits. This is not an official visit, but everywhere we go, we meet with the Ivorians and tell them, well, you're studying here, you're working here, meaning in France, in Spain, in Portugal, in Turkey. When you finish, come back to Côte d'Ivoire, because it's a growing economy. It's a country which has a lot of potential, and you have industries from all those countries setting up offices in Côte d'Ivoire, and if they speak Chinese, they're in China. Obviously, when they go back to Côte d'Ivoire, they'll find a job easily in a Chinese company. So I know that you're a former soccer player. I have another friend who's a former soccer player, Weah, of Liberia, who is running for presidency for the office in October. So good luck to you for the future.
So I'm very sorry. We don't have enough time. The only thing I can do is take one man and one woman. Okay, I will take this side a woman and this side a man. For the rest, I'm really sorry. We are running out of time.
Hi, Your Excellency. Thank you for your speech. Both of my parents are from Côte d'Ivoire, and they came here, and I was I'm the second child they had here. My dad always talks to me about going to Ivory Coast and being an ambassador, but we'll see. My question is, Idris talked about how a lot of Ivorians come here to pursue their education. I was just wondering if you have any plans to improving the education in Côte d'Ivoire so that the Ivorians can stay there and help their country out. And that's it.
Yes, I think the second
Second question.
Thank you.
Hello, Your Excellency. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. My name is Modu Cham. I'm originally from the Gambia, West Africa, and I'm studying sustainability management at the Earth Institute and the School of Professional Studies. You mentioned Côte d'Ivoire's energy capacity and the fact that the goal is to double it by 2020. Your country signed the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, and the promise was to develop your country sustainably. Are you planning to uphold that promise and develop the energy sector sustainably? Specifically, the goal is Goal 7, which is sustainable energy for all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. On the question of students coming here to study, this is true. I think Minister Tungara and myself were among the first students, Ivorian students who come to the US to study in the early 60s. And since then, of course, many more have come. And I think and also many have returned to Côte d'Ivoire. And you are right to say, what are we doing to improve the education, higher education system in Côte d'Ivoire so that students can study in Côte d'Ivoire as well. But this is what we're doing. You see, I remember when I was Prime Minister from 90 to 93, we only had one university, but in 3 years I was able to set up a second university. And now, when we came back in 2011 at the presidency, we have been able, these universities were not functioning at all. As you know, all the militia were from the university, and it was used for other things than studying, and drug trafficking, really a lot of problems. So we rehabilitated the universities in Abidjan, and since then we have set up 3 more universities, and obviously this program will continue. My objective is, I hope by 2020, to have all the the districts will have a university. We have 10 districts in Côte d'Ivoire. I think clearly if the cocoa shock is not, can be contained, is to try to have 8 to 10 universities in Côte d'Ivoire by 2020. Today we have 5. So we have 2, 3 more to do before then. So and you also probably know that Côte d'Ivoire has one of the best higher education schools in Yamoussoukro, the Institut Polytechnique and the like. And for example, this year I understand that to go to the French Polytechnic schools, I think out of 7 Africans who were recruited, Cissé can correct me, I think 5 of them were from Côte d'Ivoire. So this shows that the quality of education is has quite improved in Côte d'Ivoire. And of course, many students are coming here. And I think this exchange is good. I don't think we should just develop universities in Côte d'Ivoire and close down on Ivorians and not let them have a chance to open themselves up, to go to other countries, to Senegal, to France, to the US, elsewhere. Now, on the Gambia, the question of the SDGs, clearly we are committed to that, and we're doing quite well, because the access is already at 80% in Côte d'Ivoire, and we're one of the countries we're having very good performance. So we're confident that we'll reach these goals. Professor, you had mentioned, you had said that you wanted me to talk about the CFA franc, I think. And another point you said is, well, let me talk about the CFA franc. You know, you have a lot of discussion about the common currency, but I think all of you have studied the common currency theory, and we believe that over the past 5 decades, or more, I should say 6 decades, the fact that we have a common currency in West Africa and in Central Africa has been a good thing globally. Obviously, it all depends on the type of policies that the individual countries implement. And I was governor of our common central bank myself. I had been director of research, deputy governor, as Professor Diouf said, and then governor. And we tried to improve not only the management of the bank, and also the monetary policy of the bank. And I remember when I was director of research, we were implementing monetary forecast to try to calculate the amount of money supply we should put out before the Bank of France, you see. So people have a reverse idea that we're getting everything from France, but the central bank has been really a very autonomous institution. And I will also say that if we did not have this common currency, probably in the 1990s, Côte d'Ivoire would have had an economic catastrophe. The solidarity and the fact that it's a common management of the currency gives the pressure on the authorities, the national authorities, to implement good financial and budget policies. In fact, on 31st of August, I had lunch with President Macron in France, and I was telling him, look, if we had a national central bank in Côte d'Ivoire, with this drop in the price of cocoa, as a politician, my first instinct would have been to devalue. And so that I continue to give the farmers the same price, give them money illusion, and not take the difficult measure of reducing the domestic price of cocoa. But that's what we did. We reduced the domestic price of cocoa, and this allowed inflation to be contained and also gave the compensation to other sectors. So globally, we need to continue our reflection on the CFA franc, but I'm not those who think that this is all bad. And I think we should try to have a larger monetary area. And I hope that to include all the ECOWAS countries, because the larger the area is. After all, the people forget the United States. You have the dollar circulates, the dollar of New York circulates in Colorado or in Florida. But it's the same thing we should do. And in Europe, I would tell the people who say, well, why don't you have your own currency? France had the French franc. Today they have a euro. And the euro circulates in Germany, it circulates in France, in Italy, in Spain. That does not make it a bad currency. The main thing is the domestic national policies have to be convergent, have to be sustainable, and have to be in conformity with the domestic needs. To finish on this, I would say that it was when I was governor when I indicated to the head of states that we have a monetary policy at that time in the late 80s. And the European Union had an economic integration, but they were having problem setting up a monetary union. So I told President Diouf, said, well, look, since we already have the most difficult part, having a monetary union, let's have an economic union. So that's how we came to set up the Economic and Monetary Union of West Africa. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, His Excellency. Before giving you 2 minutes for your final conclusions, I would like to thank my colleagues, our students who have been present, have asked excellent questions, which is a testimony of the education Colombia is giving them. I would also like to thank President Ouattara for his thoughtful presentation, for both discussing the present and the future of the continent, highlighting the trajectories of West Africa, but also of Ivory Coast, which has really enabled a frank conversation. And in particular, I would like to thank him for discussing at the end the franc CFA. And what I would really like to ask him, this is a question my colleagues, but also many African scholars are interested in, is Ivory Coast organizing a real discussion about the Ivorian experience since the crisis, because I think that lesson can be learned from that experience. And the reflection on that experience is absolutely crucial for the progress of not only democratic institution in Africa, but the progress of the democratic conversation. For that, I would like to thank him, because it's also important for a politician to know the facts. And I think that President Ouattara has shown us that he knows the facts. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Professor. I'd like to thank you for having given me this opportunity to make this address to the World Leaders Forum, and to thank the students and all those who are here and who have taken the time to come and listen to me. And I was really quite straightforward in my presentation, and talking truthfully about developments in Côte d'Ivoire. We've made good progress, it's true. We've made mistakes also, and I think clearly there is a challenge for all of us, but particularly for the young people who are here. You are the next leaders of Côte d'Ivoire, of Africa, and of your countries, and I believe it's important for you to, at some stage, to go back to Africa, to your countries, to help, because the experience in universities like Columbia, University of Pennsylvania, elsewhere, Yale, Harvard, are quite enormous for the future of our continent. And I'm very grateful for the time you have spent to listen to what I had to say. Good night to all of us. Thank you. Thank you.